Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. The Gemara just previously brought a brisa from the Sifra, authored by Rabbi Yehuda, to explain that which it says in the Pasuk Gabe, the Yom Kippurim service, V'aso Chatos, teaching us that the Goral is what designates the carbon, the Sa'ir, to be a Chatos, and not one's designation with his own words. Now the Gemara uses this brisa to then ask the following. First says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda, Ein hakinin misparshois elo oy balekuchois bailim oy basiyas koin. Rav Chisda teaches us when it comes to then the kinin, which is a pair of birds, for example, brought by a yoledes. One bird is to be then for a chatos, the other one is to be for an oila. He says they can only be designated at the time that the owner does so when purchasing the birds, or if not, when the kohen does then the carbon. But in between, one cannot designate with his own words if it's going to be a chatos or an oila. Those are the words of Chisda. Rav Shimi bar Ashi, my time with Rav Chisda. What is the rationale for Rav Chisda to say it's totally on the shas of the purchase or the shas of the asiya? Dichsiv, he brings a pasuk velokcha. One pasuk is velokcha, ve'osa, and the other one says ve'osa. Oy belekicha oy ba'asiya, teaching us or during the time of purchasing the birds, or the time when the birds are actually offered by the kohen. But in between, one's designation is not chal on those birds. Meisve. Now the Gemara comes back to the brisa that we had said before. Ve'asu chatas. Again, I'm going to read the pasuk inside. The pasuk states in regards to Yom Kippurim, v'hikriv ha'aron es hasoyer, asher Allah alav ha'garal lahashem v'asu chatos. And Aaron ha'koyen, he brings close the soyer, and he then is Allah HaGoral and makes it a chatos. Mashma that the Goral, the lottery, that itself makes the designation for the carbon to be a chatos. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, a question on Rav Chisda. V'aso chatos. It says in this pasuk, and he made it into a chatos. Tainu, the Goral makes the chatos. HaGoral oise chatos, ve'en Hashem oise chatos. The Goral, the lottery is what makes it into a carbon chatas. That gives his designation. But declaring that it's a carbon chatos does not make it a carbon chatos. Sheyachal v'aloi dinhu. The Bryce explains, because I might have thought through a kal v'chomer otherwise. Uma b'mokum shaloi kidesh ha'garal kidesh Hashem. In a situation like the two pair birds, when you don't mekadesh it with a garal, you're mekadesh with Hashem, with a designation, a verbal designation. Mokum shekidesh hagaral eino din sheyikdash Hashem. Then in a place of Yom Kippurim where you do use the garal, so then certainly I would be able to then use the designation of the oral shem to determine that it's Hashem, that it's the korban la Hashem. Talmud loymar va'aso chatos. That's what the pasuk comes to teach me, that no, dafka is during using a goral. Ha-goral oise chatos ve'en Hashem oise chatos. It's the goral that makes the carbon chatos, and not the designation, the verbal designation that makes it to chatos. Now the Gemara brings up the question on Rav Chisda. V'ho-hocha, but over here, the lav shah lekicha, v'lav shah asiyahi, v'ktani dekova. The Gemara, the Brisa, and the Gemara understands the Brisa to mean that we're talking about the same time that the Garal takes place is when the designation of the oral designation would take place as well. And since the Garal is not the time of the purchase and not the time of the Asiya, it's in between. So too the verbal designation would also be a time in between. And yet it says Viktani de Kova. It says that it would be Kova in this Brisa. So you see it's a kasha on Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda is only going to then be koveya if it's the shas of the lekicha or the shas of the asiyah, but not in between. And here it says that indeed it will be the shas of the garal, which is in between. Omar Amarov hochi ka'omar. Rav explains the brisa. This is how you have to understand the brisa. Ma b'makom shelo kidesh hagaral, va'afilu b'shas lekich va'afilu b'shas asiyah. In a place when it's not the shas of the Kiddush Hagaral, namely by the pair birds, even during the time of the Lekicha or the time of the Asiyah, Kiddush Hashem b'shas Lekicha b'shas Asiyah, he's Mekadesh with a oral designation. Mokom shekidesh hagaral shaloi b'shas lekicha v'shaloi b'shas asiyah. Then on Yom Kippurim, when we do use a garal, which is not going to be b'shas lekicha v'shas asiyah, eino din sheyikadesh Hashem b'shas lekicha v'shas asiyah. Certainly, you should be able to then use an oral designation during the time of the asiyah or time of the lekicha. Talmud Loimar, the Brisa concludes v'aso chatos. In regards to Yom Kippurim, the seer says v'aso chatos. Hagaral oisev chatas ve'en Hashem oisev chatas. Dafka the garal, the lottery makes it a chatas and not an oral designation. Toshma, the Gemara asks from the following brisa: Mikdash, mitame mikdash oni. In oni, he enters the mikdash in a state of tuma. That requires him to then bring a carbon chatas and oil of yared. V'hifrish mos. What's an oil of yared? It means that a wealthy person who can afford an animal, he then brings a carbon chatos from an animal. If it's a person who is not wealthy, he's poor, and he can't afford the animal, then he brings two birds, a carbon chatos and a carbon oila. If he's even poorer than that, and he can't afford the birds, then he can bring a flour offering. So it states over here in the Brisa, Toshma, mitamim mikdash ani, an ani who enters the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah, v'hifrish mos lekinoi v'he'eshir. He set aside money for his pair birds, for a chatas and oila, and then he became wealthy. Now, as a wealthy person, he now needs to bring an animal for the chatos. V'achakach omer, afterwards he says, Eilu lechatos ve'eilu la'oilosoi. These are going to be towards his chatos, and the others monies are going to be towards the oila. Moisif umevi chayvasoi midmei chatosoi. He then adds money towards the chatos, which is going to be the animal that he's going to then bring for his carbon. Ve'ein moisif umevi chayvasoi midmei oilosoi. But he doesn't add and bring monies for the oila. Because as a wealthy person, he doesn't bring an oila. That was only if he would bring two birds. One is a chatos, one is an oila. But now that he's wealthy, he's only going to bring the animal offering as a chatos. V'hohocha asked the Gemara, based on this brisa, the lav shas lekich v'la shas asiyah. V'ktani dekava. Here we're not talking about the time that he purchased, and we're not talking about the time that it was actually brought as a carbon. Yet it states over here that it's valid. That means to say that it says that he's able to then add money for the chatos, and he cannot no longer change that what he did for the oil. He doesn't add. In other words, the oil was already then designated. So how? And here we're saying it was in between. It wasn't the shas of the kniyan. It wasn't the shas of the asiyah. Kashan Rav Chisda. Rav Sheishes. Rav Sheishes says v'tizbara. Do you really think so? This brisa is inaccurate, and I'll prove to you that there's a shibush in the brisa as follows. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Oshaya, mitame mikdash oshir vehevi korban oni. A person who was an oshir was tamei when he entered the Beis HaMikdash, which is mechayiv him a carbon chatos. As an oshir, he should bring a carbon chatos as an animal, and he brings a carbon as an oni, as two birds. Lo yatsa. He's not yatsa, says the Brisa, according to Tanakama. V'kiven de lo yatsa heichi kava. And according to this Tana, since he's not yatsa, how was he kava? In other words, according to this, he's saying over here that he was not yatsa, that which he designated as mashma, that the designation had some sort of effect, only he's not yatsa. How could it have an effect? Hooray! Here we're talking about a situation, one, he was an oshir, so there's something wrong with this brisa. Elamai islach lameim. What are you going to say? It must be shekvar omar be'ani yusoi. He already designated, he already said so when he was an ani. It wasn't when he was an oshir. So hachanami, once we say that, there's a shibush in the brisa, then we'll also say shekvar omar b'shas hafrosha. When did he say this? The shas hafrosha, therefore it's not a kasher of chizda, because that's when he did the designation, the time of the hafrosha. So therefore, like Rav Chizda says, that it can be done at the time of the hafrosha. It's not a kasher. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Chago, Amar Rabbi Yoshia, the Amar Yatza. he's chaylik in the Tanakama, and he says that if the Ashir brings a carbon of an ani, he is Yatsa. Ask the Gemara, my Ika Lememar, on top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis. What are you going to say? Lefi Shitas Rabbi Chizda, here, what are you going to say? According to this opinion of Rav Chago, named Rav Yoshia, here we're saying that's not the Shas of the Lakicha, not Shas of the Siyah. And he's Kavaba, and therefore he's Yatsa. Says Gemara, Lo Teima ve'achar kach Omar, Ela Ema ve'achar kach lo kach ve'omar. Don't say that afterwards he said, as if the designation took place in between, but rather, he said, he was lokach va'omar, at the time of the lekicha, and therefore Rav Chizda would be fine to go with this. He says, the shas lekicha, you can go ahead and make the designation. Ask the Gemara, but still it says, lokach moisif umevi chavosai mainiu. How could he go ahead and add from his chayva? It was already at the time of the lekicha. And that yet it says before that he's moisif umevi. So how could that be? He already bought a carbon of the birds. So how can he moisif for the animal as a chatos? I'm sorry. The answer is a Gemara. The parik lay that he redeemed. He was poide the oif. Ask the Gemara. V'ha ein poidin la'oif. Behold, we have a principle that you cannot be poid in oif. You can only poid an animal. Let's say the animal is a balmum. You can be poid the animal. But an oif that's a balmum, you can't be poid it. Omra papa kigon shalokach pirida achas. He only bought one, designated one of the two birds. Let's say he designated one to be a chatos. Then the other one, memela, is an oila, or he designated one to be an oila. The other one is going to be a kedusha v'chatos. I oila zovan, if he bought and designated as an oila, moisiv meivi chavosoi midmei chatosoi. Then the other one, which is memela a chatos, he then brings money and he adds on to that. V'hai oila ozla l'dava, and the oila that he bought goes for a voluntary offering. I chatos zovan, if he bought chatos, that's what he designated, and memela the other one is an oila, then ein moisiv umevi chavosoi midvei oilosoi. He does not add to the oila. V'hai chatos ozla misa, and the chatos then goes to misa because it's an unbrought offering. So therefore, it has to then be left to misa. The Gemara now brings back, we just said there's a machlokes between the Tanakama and the opinion of Rav Chaga, Amar Rav Oshaya. The Gemara now brings this back. Gufa, Amar Rav Elazar, Amar Rav Oshaya. Metame mikdash ashir vehevi korban ani lo yatsa. If a wealthy person went into the Beis HaMikdash while he was in a state of tuma, and then he brings a carbon of an ani, instead of bringing an animal as a chatas, he brings a pair of birds, one is a chatas and one is an oila. He's not yatsa, says the Tanakama. Rabbi Chaga, Rabbi Hoshaya, yatsa. Rabbi Chaya, in the name of Hoshaya, or before it was stated Yoshia, he says he is yatsa. He argues. Frekte Gemara Meisvei, Mitzara ani shehevi carbon ashir yatsa. If an ani who's a mitzara, he brings a carbon as a ashir, so he's yatsa, because he not only brought something that was necessary as an ani, but he even brought more. So certainly that's yatsa, according to everybody. However, ashir shehevi carbon ani la yatsa. But the mitzar who's an ashir, who then brings the carbon as an ani, that he's not yatsa. Instead of bringing the animal, he brings two birds. That he's not yatsa, says the Tanakama. Or says the Brisa rather. So therefore it's a kasha on what we just saw in the name of Rav Chaga and Rabbi Oshia. He said that you are yatsa. Gemara answers, shiny hasam, in mitzara it's different. Why? Dechsiv, it says zois. In the pasuk of the mitzara, it states the word zois tiyeh teras ha-mitzara. So zois tells me specifically this has to be then the offering. And therefore, or makbid, to be dafka this. So that's by the mitzara. And therefore, even Rav Chagai would agree that has to be so when it comes to the mitzara. But in the case of the one who enters the Beis HaMikdash, then even the wealthy person can bring a carbon for an ani. Ihochi, asked the Gemara, if you're going to bring me zois, is a hakpada by mitzara, then we have to be very consistent then. Reisha nami, then in the Reisha also, when you have a poor person, he shouldn't be able to bring a wealthy offering, because the zois, it says, zois taras, zois tiyeh taras ha-mitzara. Answers the Gemara, ha Rabbi Rachmana taras. Since the Torah adds the word taras, that therefore teaches us that he isn't able to bring a better offering if he wants, like the Brisa indicates, Vatanya, taras l'rabois mitzara ani, shehevi carbon usher. Even the ani can bring a higher level carbon if he wishes to do so. Although it says v'zois, but taras come to teach me a ribui. Yacham, I think afilu usher shehevi carbon ani. I might think then taras comes to include that as well, that the usher can bring a carbon of an ani. Talmud loymar zois. For that we have zois. Ask the Gemara v'neilaf mina. Why don't we learn out from mitzara that just as there's a hakpada that you cannot bring, an usher cannot bring an ani's carbon, so we should say that's also true when an usher who is tamei goes in the Beis Hamikdash, he can't bring the carbon of an ani. On that the Gemara says mi'et rachmana. In mitzara it states v'im dalhu. And since it says v'im dalhu, therefore there's a miut dafka by mitzara, that the one who is then going to be a wealthy person, he can't bring a poor offering. Only the poor person can bring the poor offering.